Hi everyone, Paul from Racing Vincent. A couple of you may have spotted I posted a couple of weird videos a couple of weeks ago on YouTube, and they were actually videos intended for an Emco engineer who was giving me some advice as I was having some issues. I was going to take them off. I noticed a couple of people have looked at them, and an old fellow Emco owner has also contacted me to give a couple of bits of advice. So if anybody interested, I might keep it on for a bit longer and also just give an update to what the issue was. So back in December I had issues with a compressor, and without going into too much detail, under here is a compressor, quiet compressor, with 2 twin motors, so 4 motors in all. And in December I started having issues with that and ultimately needed to replace one of the motors. Then I had an issue early in January, which just compounded the time down. And what that issue was that the nice thing about this machine, which is an Emco 325, it's an older machine now but still lovely quality, it has 12 tools on a Sauber head, but the 3252 was the first machine that I think that I know of with Emco where they introduced C-axis, which means 6 of those tool posts are driven and can have milling attachments. So there's a separate axis as well as a standard X and Z axis that most CNC lathes have. There's an additional axis, C-axis, and just here you can see a milling attachment. And in this particular case, what I was doing, if I show you it, was making cheesehead screws. Quite a popular item, and if I say so myself, they are quite nice. They're patterned on the original Norton type, slightly different to commercial type. And as a first stop, I manufacture these with, as you can see, the shaft diameter correct thread and a blank head. And then I put it into a collet, and unfortunately on these I have to do each one individually, but I put it in as a blank head and it faces, and then it will come in and do a milling operation. And as you can see there, I've got a small milling tool, and I spend a lot of time trying to get the speed right, because obviously there's a lot of these to do, but you know very quickly if you've got the speed, the feed rate or the depth of cut too much, because you lose the tip of that tool in basically a split second. So anyway, I was running it, and for when it's using a milled tool, depending on what kind of operation it's doing, this spindle, this main spindle, will lock and become effectively a C-axis spindle, and you set it at between 1 and 360 degrees. And just after Christmas, when I started doing this operation with an awful lot of cheesehead screws, it wasn't long before the machine came up with an error message and stopped, and effectively the C-axis was getting locked. Yeah, so the C-axis was getting locked, and unfortunately I'm to work on it on my own, particularly as we're in lockdown. So even if an engineer could come and they're a long way away, I'm in a quite enclosed space, so I knew I'd have to get the covers off myself. And behind the machine here, there is on the left side all of the pneumatics, which is a whole series of pipes that power all the different pneumatics around the machine. Behind this section here, at the back of the machine, there are doors that lead to a number of masterboards. Behind this section here, at the back of the machine, there are doors that lead to a number of masterboards. And then added on to that is pneumatic pistons. So at the time of the last videos, I'd actually gone through all the pneumatics as best as I could. I'd gone through the mechanical side of the machine. And at the time when I posted the videos, it was beginning to look like one of the masterboards had failed, and the masterboards receive instructions and send instructions, and if you go back and look at those videos, you'll see there's different lights flashing. One side represents input commands, and a light on a diode flashes corresponding to one of the pneumatic valves, and the outputs obviously send those messages through to the pneumatics. As it turned out, it hadn't failed, but it took a long time to replicate the failure exactly and follow it through to realise it wasn't failing. It was actually, if I replicated the full series of commands and how each one of those interacted with the masterboard, I could see that the instruction was being sent for the pneumatic. I then went to, and I'll put a photograph at this point here so you can see the valves. I then went through a series of changing valves, swapping them round for each other, and I'm hoping you can probably see a photograph now of all the different valves. The third from the bottom valve, there is a light on the right hand side which gets triggered when the valve is in one direction, and a light on the left that gets triggered when it's going in the other direction. And actually, they too eventually have now corresponded to the point in the program where they should have been going. So it did come back to pneumatics, but the main valve block was receiving air, and I did a whole series of tests over a week to prove that, until we ended up down here. The Emco has, this particular Emco has two pistons here. The first one here is for the parts collector bin, and frankly that's always been a bit of a painful, because it has an interesting little sender there which you may just see if you look closely. It's not showing at the moment, but actually on that, where that little blue area is, that's actually a Festo, which is a bit of advertising here. Festo is the company that supplied the original pneumatics for this machine. That's a Festo valve which lights orange when the valve goes past that area, and that sends a trigger to the board, master board, saying stop here, I've reached this point, stop here. But the other way for these units to operate is this other piston is the C-axis piston. And although you probably can't see very clearly, let's try and get a little torch and show you. There we go. You can see up there, there's a big, this is the master spindle, there's a big drum. It has its own pneumatics, you can just see in the distance there, for the collet, in and out, and that's all balanced because it's spinning at very high speed. And you'll see that that large aluminium cylinder has on the outside of it a ring, a steel ring. And in front of that here, which the older models didn't have, is its own stepper motor for the C-axis. So when this whole area here engages in, so it receives a rotate in command, and it does a couple of checks to make sure that it is allowed to do that, i.e. the spindle isn't spinning. A motor then controls the spindle and the number of degrees. So if you set it at 0 degrees up here, it will lock in a position which corresponds to 0 degrees, and that will always be 0 degrees. But although you may not see it very clearly, up here are what are called limit switches. And those limit switches tell the machine when they're pressed that something was either engaged or disengaged. And those again were part of the testing process. So this piston uses this little sender unit. This one uses limit switches up here. And it was this area that turned out to be at fault. And ultimately, it turned out to be well, I can't be 100% sure if I've got a slightly faulty one-way valve. So on either side here is a pneumatic pipe going to a one-way valve. If you can see, one-way valve. And there's a one-way valve on either side, and it either pushes it out, pushes it there, or pushes it there. And although they were working, for some reason they'd gone out of balance. Now that could have been me, because the main Festo input valve, or valve head and block, has a number of gauges, and it has a water trap catcher. And periodically I empty that, and actually I hadn't noticed, and it did look like it was close to full. Virtually the first task I did on stripping this machine was to take the one-way valves off, and I found some water mixed with oil, and it uses a very thin, slight trace of pneumatic oil in at the main valve head. And after a period of use, I think these probably do get a little bit of residue oil in them. So there was a bit of oil in one of these. But even having cleaned that out, it didn't make any difference. And it was only about a week later, having gone through this whole process of other tests, that I came back here and realised that A, it may have been the one-way valves, and one of them may just be end of life. And I ended up swapping these around with other ones I've got. So this one here is a more up-to-date one that I fitted a year or two ago. And then, although you can't see it clearly here, on either end there is a tiny, you can see it on this one, you can probably just see here, there is a tiny little adjuster, and actually it seemed to be a combination of cleaning and swapping the valves around and playing with that adjustment, and by just slightly tweaking it, this piston was fully retracting, which it wasn't when I got the error message. So what was a relatively, knowing all of the things that I now know, it wasn't a relatively difficult issue to fix, but frankly it was a nightmare going through all the things I had to do to get there. First of all, I want to thank the Emco engineers who helped me remotely with a number of emails. I sent them detailed, this has happened, that's happened, the other, diagnostics, and they offered advice. Thank you very much. Quality stuff as always from them. Quality stuff, quality machines. The only thing that I did do, this is an older machine now, although still very reliable. You'll probably notice as I'm taking this video, I actually put all the main covers back on the machine, and this cover, if I come backwards, this cover and the other spindle covers actually weigh quite a lot, and they're not easy to get by because I've got a milling machine next to it here. They're very difficult to take off, and having found the issue last week and spent a day adjusting it and tweaking the program, tweaking the valve settings, I then put all the covers back on, and the next day, 20 minutes into the run, the failure message came up again. Oh, what a pain. And having spent 2 weeks on this particular issue now, day in, day out, trying to find it, 2 or 3 hours a day, I lost patience. And as you can see, what I actually did was cut a hole in the machine. I know that sounds terrible, but, and as I joke with the Emco people, have I invalidated my warranty? Probably have. It actually, I did spend a bit of time trying to clean it up, making sure it was as neat as possible. I fitted hinges, and I fitted stainless nulled adjusters so that I can get in quickly. And hold on a second, my nifty little cable, a piece of brazing wire coming down to hold it open. It works brilliantly. Not only was I able to play with the adjustment on these two, and under here you have a parts collector bin, and beneath that is a large suds tank. So fluid will go in here and collect at the bottom where it will go down into the fluid tank. I think in total it's like 37 gallons if it was absolutely full. But they'll also go through here and collect in the bottom. So while I'm adjusting, I've got a little piece of lock wire on the little jeweler's screwdriver so that if I do drop it, it doesn't somehow get down in the suds tank. But not only was I able to do this one, but this has always been difficult to get this adjusted. You can just see actually the orange light is on. But it turned out the reason this had been so difficult to adjust just lately is, again, that little valve adjuster, but at this end, which is almost inaccessible, just needed adjusting. and it's very, very difficult to do that in situ unless you've got all the covers off. So now I've done both, and for the last few days it's been working great. So anybody that is an Emco owner out there that gets a similar issue, Emco I'm sure will come out and look at that, but if you are wondering, this stuff is generally I found to be very reliable, but if you do need to adjust it, one thing worth checking are these one-way valves and the little adjusters there. Tiny tweak and you'll find that sometimes it will just retract slightly more. Okay, so she said screw. Doing this one-handed as I'm holding the camera. Shut the collet. Sorry, I can't see much, and it is quite a quick operation. So here we go. Press the button. Comes in. There's a facing operation first, using a roughing tool. I use a radius on that, which is equivalent to Norton's original white radius. And now you see it's gone in with a very small 1.5mm end tool, and it's milling the slot. I definitely can't take the suds off to show you this, it will destroy the tool in a second or so. But I spent some time trying to get this feed rate as quick as I can, so as to do the cheese head slot as quickly as I can, but without overheating the tool. It takes, well, I've got it down to 1 minute and 10 seconds. There you go. By the way, while it's just finishing that, there's the door closed with the screws. It's now finished. There you can see. Now, I've also spent a little bit of time this time just making sure that the head depth of screw is exactly the same. There's so, hope anybody that got similar machine that has this similar issue, this might help. Okay, cheerio.